The greatest gift that our Lord Jesus Christ has given us is our redemption through His work of the cross. And we're able to participate in that event. We are actually there at Calvary through the holy sacrifice of the Mass. It is the premier event of worship. It's how God asked us to worship Him, and it's how we as Catholics worship. It is the true worship. We worship in spirit and in truth through the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And as Catholics, we go to church week after week. We see the same movements, gestures, and the same routine, you might say. And maybe we don't exactly know what those things mean, but we've seen them so often, we just kind of get familiar with them, and they become part of the landscape. And what I'm hoping to do in this two-part series is to give you a better explanation, an in-depth explanation of every movement and sequence in the Mass, the vessels, the vestments, as a way of giving you a deeper appreciation that for the purpose of allowing you to celebrate Mass more fully and with a greater involvement of your own mind and heart. This will not be a Mass. I am not celebrating Mass, so just so you know that, but I will be going through the motions of all of the parts of the Mass, half this week and half next week. I want to give you a couple of parameters, or a couple of, not so much parameters, but guiding principles as we go through this two-part series. And you'll see this coming up again and again. Number one, Jesus was a Jew. He worshiped as a Jew. God formed the Jewish people as the environment for which the Messiah was to come, into which the Messiah was to come. And so it should come as no surprise that our life as Catholics, and especially our worship as Catholics, finds its root and is directly connected to the worship of the Jews, particularly the Passover celebration. So the Jewish customs, the Jewish traditions, and the Jewish approach to worship plays heavily in our Mass. And I'm going to be pointing that out repeatedly, that these were the customs of the Jews. This is how the Jews worshiped, and in fact still do in their synagogue services and so forth. In many instances, you'll see as I make reference to that. So the presence of Judaism and Jewish worship is very, very heavy in our Catholic experience. As I say, there's a reason for that. Jesus was a Jew, and God, in His wisdom, chose the Jewish people as the foundation for salvation. The second point that I want to make, and this is a principle that we'll see repeatedly as we go through this, there are practical matters that were incorporated into the Mass that originally were done so for very practical reasons, but then after time they took on spiritual significance. A theology was later on developed to understand what began as very practical things. And that happens all the time. That's the way of being an incarnational church, is that material things have a profound meaning as we see them in the context of worship. But that's getting a little ahead of myself. But that's the second principle. Many of the things that we do in our Mass have their root and their beginning with very practical purposes, and that later on were understood more spiritually. The spiritual meaning of those things were only understood as time went on. Those are the two guiding principles for understanding the Mass as we go through it. Okay? Tonight, what we're going to do is the first part of the Mass. The Mass is very conveniently divided into two parts: the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist. And so tonight we're going to go through all of the steps, as many as we can, from the beginning to the liturgy of the Eucharist. Well, and then next week we'll do the liturgy of the Eucharist. First thing I want to do is talk about the vestments, what the priest does in the sacristy. We wear black. We come dressed as black. That's our the statement that we are dead to the world. That's why black is the color of the priest's clothing, his ordinary clothing, clerical clothing. Now, we're not dead. And not exactly dead to the world. I love life. I love all of the good things of life as well. But it is the case that, priests have given up certain things in their lives in order to be able to serve the Lord in the church. And so black is the symbolic color of that. So we begin with the black. Then, the first vestment that the priest will wear is the alb. And an alb is always white. The word alb comes from, it's a Latin word. Alb means white. That's what the word alb means. It means white. You maybe have heard of an application of an albino. An albino, someone whose skin is white. Alb means white. And it's worn as a sign of purity, as a sign of new life. When we baptize children, we vest them, or adults, we vest them in white. White is a sign of purity. And so that is the color of the alb, the undergarment, that our hearts would be pure as we enter into this celebration. So the priest puts on his alb. Now I might have to move my microphones here to get this to work right, but you'll get the message. Then, the next thing that the priest does, wears a cincture. We wear a cincture, a rope, that symbolizes that we are led where we would not go. The rope symbolizes that we are led by the Lord and His Spirit, and that we belong to Him, that our lives are not our own, we're not the masters of our life. And so the cincture is worn as a symbol of that surrender to the will of our Lord, that we're led and not the leaders. We belong to Him. So we wear a cincture. Now, the next vestment, and this is really the vestment of authority for a priest, and for any sacrament, it's called the stole. We can't celebrate Mass without a stole. This is the authority. In the Jewish times, the high priest, when he was exercising his office, put on a stole. That meant that he was now officially serving in his capacity as the high priest. And so, taken from that model, the church also followed that with a stole as well. On most stoles, there is a cross that's embroidered on the top of it, at the point of the apex of the stole. And what a priest usually does, what I do, I kiss the cross and then put the stole on. And now I'm ready, almost. And the next vestment, the one that goes over the stole, is called a chasuble. That is Latin for a little house. In Spanish, we call it a casulla. And it would also, like saying una casita, a little house. Because when you put the chasuble on, it's almost like putting a house over you. And there's the chasuble. And these are now the vestments that a priest wears. Now I'm vested for Mass.